Hey there, Purple Plant Girl here. I've been storing my tomatoes down in the basement. You know, those tomatoes that were of decent size, but not quite ripe yet, but it was too cold to keep them outside. I picked all of those before I took my tomato plants out for the year, and I just set them in egg crates, and I have them down, actually on my plant shelves down in the basement. And I had been keeping a good eye on them, but it's been a few weeks and I kind of forgot to keep checking them, busy with other things. And this is what happens when you don't check. See that guy in the middle there? Yeah, there's a few like that. So I've already gone through a whole tray, and about half to 3/4 of it was moldy. I've taken out the few that were still good on it. I gotta go through the other trays. And then these are obviously ripe, so I'm gonna take the rest that are not going bad, wash them up, trim them up a little bit, and just throw them in a pot and let them simmer down and just make just a really basic just tomato sauce. I don't even know if I'll bother adding anything else into it. And then I'm just gonna freeze them in containers. Just be really quick just to get that out of the way. So first thing first, get rid of these moldy guys. So I'm just gonna take them. I have a compost container here in the sink. So I'll just get rid of any that have gone bad. Oh, how does a person let that happen? I was actually down there trying to get my sweet potatoes in a nice warm, humid spot so they can cure. And then I was like, what smells down here? Oh yeah, that'd be the tomatoes that I have rotting. Okay, so about half. I think this tray is a little better, but I don't know till I really get into it here. So pull 2 good ones out that are good size. Yeah, that one's nasty. Good, good. Ooh. These little egg crates work well for this because you can keep them separated. If I'd had them all if I'd had all these tomatoes touching each other, the rot would have spread even worse than it did. That tray was mostly good, just a couple of bad ones. One more tray, and now, like I said, it's been at least a few weeks, if not a month, since I've had these sitting here. So these, they're still green, but they're starting to shrivel up. I don't know if you can see that, but they're getting kind of wrinkly. So I'm going to toss those 2. They're not going to ripen. They're just going to continue to dry out and get nasty. This tray is looking pretty good. I don't think this tray had been there quite as long as the rest. I had picked some earlier as I was slowly getting out my plants. And so some trays had been there longer than others. So just a couple in that tray. So I wound up with a decent amount there that are gonna be able to be used, and better get them used. I also wound up with quite a few that aren't so good, but those will go out to the compost, so they're not entirely wasted, I guess. But I'm just gonna get these washed and run those out so I don't have that stink in my kitchen. And then I'll get to making some tomato sauce. So I'm not going to get too fancy with cutting these up. Just going to take the tops off, a quick quarter, toss them in the pot. Now, if you don't even have time for this, you can just take your tomatoes and put them in a freezer bag and just freeze them whole. And when you thaw them out, the skins will slide right off if you like to remove the skins. And you can just make whatever sauces or cooked product you want with them. This is a whole mix of tomato varieties from my garden, so it'll have a nice flavor profile. And lots of paste tomatoes in here too, so shouldn't be too juicy, shouldn't need to boil down for too long. But have some of those heirloom tomatoes in there with the darker skin, which give that nice, almost smoky flavor. If you like a little bit more of that, you could roast these tomato sections, just put just a little bit of olive oil on top. Then take your sectioned tomatoes on a sheet pan, put them in the oven, about 400 for, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. Get a little browning on them. Take some of the moisture out, and it'll just up that flavor profile a little bit before you cook them down into a sauce, or just freeze them like that. Well, it looks like I underestimated how much pot I needed for this, but so I've gotten a larger pot. Dump those tomatoes in there. That's better. Now I have room to work in there. Pop that on the stove. Gonna bring it up to a boil and stirring it often, and then I'll just turn it down and let it simmer for a bit and bring the immersion blender in. I had a couple of cherry tomatoes sitting on my counter still, so I just washed them, took the stems off, and I'll throw them in as well. So it's only been a minute. You can see all the juices are starting to come out. It's starting to boil. Heat things up, and that's what we want. So we get everything nice and hot. A really good boil going before I turn it down. So just a couple more minutes on the high heat, and now hopefully you can see there all the little bubbles. It's simmering away really nicely. Lots more liquid in there. So I'll just let this just boil down or simmer down a little bit more in the pot, get rid of some of this liquid. You could, if you wanted at this point, add some of your some herbs and seasonings. Dried herbs work the best. Like I have some basil that I picked that I dried. I could throw that in, or a bay leaf would be good, or you know, some garlic. You can even just throw a whole clove in there and just let it simmer away and then pull it out later, or just use the immersion blender on it later. So some Italian seasoning, Greek seasoning, whatever you like for your flavor profile. Any of that could go in right now if you want to add some flavor. Like I said, I want to keep this really simple, just basic tomatoes. And then when I need to pull out some sauce for anything, it's just a really base layer that I can season how I want when I go to cook with this later on. If you want some ideas, recipe suggestions, I do have a few. I'll put some links down below for you for some ways to use up your tomatoes. And I'll throw a link to a canning book if you want to know a little bit more about home canning and canning your tomatoes. You definitely can do that. I can a lot of tomatoes, tomato sauce, salsas, whole tomatoes, and I use, most of my recipes are from that book. When it comes to home canning, I really like it, but today I don't have all day to spend in the kitchen, working the canner, boiling this down, and doing everything just the right way for home canning. So this is just a quickie method where it can be frozen and be food safe. Okay, so these tomatoes have been simmering away here for about 20 minutes now. They have reduced a little bit, I'd say from probably about a third from where it was at the top of the pot here. And I'm going to take my immersion blender and I'm just going to quickly go through and just make all the chunks smaller. I don't think I'm going to worry about getting it completely smooth today, but I'm just going to, you know, get the chunks out. So I'm just going to turn it off. If you don't have an immersion blender, you could take this in small batches into a blender. Just be careful, it'll be hot. Make sure you're covering the top, doing it in small batches. And then put it back in the pot if you want it to reduce more, or let it cool down and put it in your containers. If you wanted to run these through a food mill and get all the skins and seeds and everything out, you certainly could, but like I don't have a food mill and I'm not really worried about them. So now it's all blended up. It's pretty smooth. There might be the odd little chunk left in there, but nothing too big. And it has a nice texture to it, nice consistency. You can see how you break up all those other pieces, it kind of thickens it up a little bit. You can still see the seeds, doesn't bother me. If it bothers you, then you could strain the seeds out, or like I said, you could have put it through a food mill. Squeeze the seeds out of your tomatoes. This works for me. So I'll let this cool down just a little bit, and then I'm going to be packing it into containers now. So my favorite containers are these. They're, I think, made by Ball or Bernardin, kind of the same company, just depends if you're in Canada or the US. And they have these screw top lids. They're freezer safe, they're a good heavy duty plastic, and they work well to just move from freezer, put the hot liquids in, put them in the freezer. I've used them for years. Now, I have a few of these. I can't find the lids for all of them. So I wish I'd realized that before I started this project, and then I would have maybe picked up some more, but this is what I have. So I'm just gonna use this one. And then I do have these. These are just a Betty Crocker plastic container. These are a thinner plastic. They're not as nice for in the freezer. That's what I had purchased them for. They were with the kind of canning supplies at a store one day, but although it's a decent plastic, it's not a super heavy plastic. But again, they are safe to put warm foods in, and they're safe to put in the freezer. They do work, but I don't find they're as durable as these containers here. Now, I still probably am not gonna have enough. So I'm thinking about using these bags to do the rest. Ideally, I'd like it all in the same container, but I just don't have that today, and it's just how it is. So these are just a food safe freezer bag. They have like a zipper closure at the top here, so they seal real tight. They're silicone, so they'll go, you know, from having the food put in them to the freezer and back out again quite easily. And I think they'll hold about the same amount as these. When you're doing this, you can just use a regular canning jar. I just don't want to use all my canning jars up, have this stuff in the fridge, have these in the freezer, and then want to do some canning and not have more canning jars. So I'd rather just use other containers than my canning jars. If I am freezing with canning jars, I tend to use just these plastic lids like this. So instead of using a sealer ring, because this will work just fine to go into the freezer. You can get them like this. This is the Ball brand. I also have these. These are the Mason Tops brand. These are for my wide mouth jars, but they're nice because I don't know how you can see, but they have this little kind of grippy edge on them. So they're really easy to open and close, especially if you have arthritic hands or anything. These do have a little bit of a texture there, so it does make it easier to open and close them, but it's not as nice as those with the edges instead of being completely round. And then, of course, whatever I put them in, I'm going to put some labels on so I know what it is later on. So I've just used these. These are a nice label that work well in the freezer, come out, and they don't leave a residue. I have used labels in the past that, you see, they leave this residue. And it's really hard to get off. These have gone through the dishwasher. I've scrubbed them. It's still, like, leaves this icky film. So I've started buying these and I prefer them, and I've just labeled them 19th of October of 23 because that's the date today. And I just wrote only tomatoes sauce. So that's what I'm gonna label them with. They stick well, they stay on in the freezer, these labels, which is great because some labels just seem to magically peel off in the freezer and others just never properly peel off ever again. But that's going to be the plan. I'm just gonna let this cool down a little bit before I put it into all these plastic and silicone containers. I could, if I had more time, just let this sit and get a little bit thicker, but I think this is definitely a usable thickness. As far as tomato sauces go, I think it's pretty nice, so that's what I'm gonna go with. Remember when you're freezing things that you need to leave a little bit of head space for the expansion when it freezes. One of those holders that keeps the bags open would probably be a good investment if I was going to do this often. I don't have one of those. Let's see if this helps at all. See if that's any less messy. That certainly helped. The advantage of doing this in bags is you can lay them kind of flat in the freezer. Doesn't seem like as much, but I thought I measured out the same amount of ladles. Using that large funnel certainly makes it easier than trying to just hold the bag open. Kind of looks like when you give a blood donation and they have that bag after. A little Halloween-y, I don't know. A couple more labels and then off to the freezer. And yeah, they seal really well, so I'm not worried about putting these bags in the freezer like this. The biggest worry will be this one that I made a mess of when I filled it up. Or someone coming across it and wondering what I'm storing in my freezer. Good thing I labeled them. Thanks for watching this impromptu little making tomato sauce today. If you have tomatoes that are waiting to ripen somewhere and you maybe haven't looked at them in a while, maybe it's time. And that's a good thing to do with them if you don't have a lot of time, but you have tomatoes you need to do something with. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.